Good evening, everybody. I am Ned, aka Dynamo Ned, and welcome to another episode of the TechForge Hardware Podcast for CrossForge Gaming. Tonight, I am joined by one of our co-hosts who hasn't been able to be here for the past couple of weeks. Say hello, Jason.
What's up, Ned? How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. And we're joined by a guest host this evening because, unfortunately, Hunter got called out of town for work reasons. We're joined by Mr. Matt Howard from the Cross Examine podcast.
What's up, guys? It's good to be here.
Glad to have you this evening, Matt.
You didn't say Matt Howard, did you?
Yes, he did.
Did you say Matt Howard?
Said Matt Howard.
Oh, okay. I'm just checking. I didn't want to hear meh or meh Howard.
I thought it was Mad Howard for a second, and I was going to take it and move on.
I heard meh Howard. And I was going to stand up for our guest host, man.
Oh,
I'm just giving you stuff.
No, you're good.
Apparently, ladies and gentlemen, I need to work on my enunciation. Oh, we're already off the rails. I love this podcast.
I love this video group anyway. It's great.
All right. Well, we do have some good news to talk about this evening. Everything from overheating MacBook Pros to the fact that Intel's Cascade Lake CPUs are going to be holding 3.84 terabytes of RAM.
Oh, wow. Cool.
To simulated Threadripper benchmarks for AMD's upcoming 2990X CPU.
Oh, yeah.
And so, before we jump into the tech news, though, I'd like to give everyone else the opportunity. Anything new or interesting tech-wise happened to you this week? Pick up any good deals on Prime Day or through Newegg's fantastic sale?
Oh, man, I almost jumped. So yesterday, as probably many of the viewers will know, yesterday there was that crazy, amazing good deal on that Ryzen 7 2700 for like $220.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Oh, man, I almost jumped on that sucker. Oh, I almost jumped on that thing. Because I'm researching a mini ITX build for my kids. My kids are using an old pile driver based APU that's like 5 years old now, and I mean, for what they use, it's fine. It's like Minecraft and The Sims, right? So they're okay with it, but I'm still itching to build something, so they're going to get an upgrade now, and they're going to get some Ryzen, and they're going to get lots of love from Daddy. But yeah, I just almost jumped on that thing. Beyond that, not much. How about you guys?
Well, really the only tech news that I've been looking at this week has been some leaks from the new Samsung Galaxy Note 9, and more importantly, to me at least, since we fix more of them at our shop, the Apple iPhone 11/10.2/10s, because I haven't decided on a name yet.
Is there another backslash in there or something?
Well, no, because they've also got another one that's got its own slash.
Oh my God.
It's a possible iPhone SE2 or SEX, depending on what name they eventually wanted to have. They're really cool too.
What? You lost me at like the fourth slash, dude.
Sorry.
That's awesome,
blame Apple, man. They're like Todd Howard with Skyrim. They just keep going with the same stuff.
Honestly, the last iDevice that I used was an iPhone 5. So,
wow.
Well,
which I still have in a drawer somewhere.
Over here off screen is my 7 Plus. The screen itself is a MacBook. So, you know, I keep up with the iDevices sometimes. And I have 2 iPods in my truck. So,
hey,
nice.
Since we're going to be talking about MacBooks tonight, you're the great guy to have on.
Agreed.
Now, me personally, I did indulge in Prime Day, and I did commit some PC gaming heresy.
Uh-oh.
I bought an Xbox One S for $229.
That's not bad.
I'm sorry, they were on sale for what?
$229.
Guys, Prime Day still going on? I need to.
$229.
Sadly, that deal is gone. But yeah, it was a 1 terabyte. 1 terabyte Xbox One S. Came with a free copy of Rare Replay.
Nice. I've heard good things about that.
I got it set up yesterday. It's doing well. I was really impressed. Amazon, if you're listening, I really appreciate the efficiency of your shipping, but I really don't understand your choices when it comes to security of packages. Why is it when you ship me a $25 box of protein bars that you make me go down to the office, sign for it, get it out of a locked locker, and then return it to my apartment? But, with my $250 console, it's just like, well, nope, we'll just leave it at your door, completely unsecured.
I think part of that is with who they ship it to, which is, I guess, something else in tech news. Amazon has stated that they're doing their own delivery service, which is kind of an aside. So,
oh goodness, our future is just going to be Amazon versus Google versus Comcast, isn't it?
Versus Apple. You left out
versus Apple. Yes, versus Apple.
No, Disney will buy Apple eventually.
Exactly.
Oh goodness.
It'll be Hasbro, and then Disney will buy Hasbro.
The logo, instead of being an apple with a bite, it'll be a mouse biting an apple. I'd buy it.
Oh, anyway, let's get into the tech news, shall we?
Good call.
All right. So our first article up for the evening, this is coming from a non-tech. Intel's high-end Cascade Lake CPUs to support up to 3.84 terabytes of memory per socket.
It's crazy.
Now remember, Cascade Lake processors are Intel's next generation server processors, which means that up to 4 of these can be on the same server motherboard. So that means it's supporting 3.84 terabytes per socket.
So that's just south of 16 terabytes overall.
Indeed.
Wow. Wow. Of course, you're talking
15.36 terabytes. Actual formatted, of course, would be a little bit less because it always is.
Yeah, but still, 15, roughly 15 and a half terabytes of RAM in a single system. I thought I was sitting pretty on 32 gigabytes.
Well, some of these processors too get into the tens of thousands of dollars.
It's true too.
That is true.
You technically could have a server that costs $60,000 with four sockets. Wow. You're talking. I don't know how many cores you're looking at.
They are guessing that it's going to be at least twice, if not 3 times, the cost of the DDR4 128 gigabytes versions, which cost about $3,500 a piece. So 4 of those would set you back for probably the next decade or so.
Wow.
Right.
But you wouldn't need an upgrade for the next decade or so I guess it's a win-win.
Until the next meltdown craze.
Until the next craze, yeah.
Yeah, having done some work in the enterprise space, you'd be surprised how often they do upgrade. It was just a couple of years ago that they were actually starting to phase out the first generation Sandy Bridge based Xeons, and that's why you can still find them for just dirt cheap on eBay.
Really?
Yeah, the first generation Sandy Bridge Xeons, I actually had a Core i7 3820 system on the socket 2011 motherboard, which is the same socket that they used for their Xeons for that generation.
That's a pretty small life cycle, right? I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry.
Well, it's because of power efficiency. The power efficiency improved so much between Sandy Bridge and Skylake that when Skylake came on the scene, there was basically a mass round of upgrades. And so you can still find the first and second generation Xeon E5 2670s. The 2670 is what I got. 8-core, 16-thread CPU that drops right into an X79 motherboard and works with your choice of just off-the-shelf consumer RAM. You know, I was running. There was a configuration I was running for a while with that Xeon E5 2670, 16 gigs of DDR3 in quad channel, and a GTX 770. And that did me good for quite a while until I had to sell that PC.
Well, when you're looking at process, right, you're going from 32 nanometers to, was it 32 or 28 for Sandy Bridge? I want to say it was
Let's see. Sandy Bridge was 32 nanometer. Ivy Bridge was 22.
Okay. Well, if you're going from Sandy Bridge, you're moving from 32 to 14. You know, so that's a huge power savings. Not to mention the additional processing power. So, yeah, I could totally understand that.
And you know, with Cascade Lake, it's still 14 nanometer, but it's the 14 nanometer plus plus.
// Yeah.
Up, down, left, right, BA start.
Contra. Yep.
But yeah, basically what Intel's trying to do is they're trying to provide better integration for their Optane persistent memory. Because one of the big use cases in the data center right now is basically having RAM that if the power goes out doesn't lose everything that's in it.
Yep. That's the big selling point for the next Optane rollout, is the fact that it's got some save state in it where you turn the machine off and then turn it back on, and it's at the exact point it was at when you turned it off. So
how long does that save state last, though? I mean, eventually it's going to empty. It is RAM.
Well, that's the thing about Optane. It uses Intel's Crosspoint technology, which is actually more similar to NAND flash. So it's able to save its memory state without having power supply. Intel doesn't go as far as calling it non-volatile RAM, which is what it technically would be. But there's some specific conditions for calling something non-volatile RAM, if you want to get real technical, that the 3D Crosspoint technology doesn't quite suffice for. But otherwise, it does all the things that the idea of a non-volatile RAM would do. It's still RAM, but it isn't volatile like current DRAM is.
So when you think about that, that could tremendously change the way not only servers are used, but workstations, end user computers. There's probably use cases out there for something like this that we can't think about or haven't realized yet. That is a tremendously different way of computing.
Yeah, imagine being able to work, the power goes out, and once the power is restored, you literally pick up where you left off.
Yeah.
Would have saved me a lot of college papers.
You and me both.
Well, you don't have to wait to boot up. You know, you sit down, you do your work, and then you turn your machine off. And then you come back, turn it back on. Or if you've got a queued workflow, for example, once one job in a batch is done, it turns off and then turns back on. There's lots of infrastructure jobs that work on batches and schedules. That would be huge power savings. You know, sometimes you'll have like a sniffer that waits for a packet to come through, and as soon as it senses that there's a specific kind of packet or deliverable in a directory, it turns on and processes it and then turns back off again. But you see that a lot in the virtual cloud space.
Yeah, your constant consumption of power would go down by a lot. You would only be using a fraction of it until you actually needed everything, and then it would kick on and then cut back off.
Exactly.
Yeah, in a fully virtualized environment, I could see that being a huge boon, because I know at work, working with a healthcare company, that we spin up and spin down servers literally all the time. And to be able to imagine where you could, when you get below a certain threshold with your hypervisor, to be able to just shut off banks of RAM that are Optane and then be able to just turn them back on when you need them.
That'd be amazing. Honestly.
That would be really great. Cost effective too.
I don't really see this working like RAM though. I see this working more like in enterprise data centers. You have, I think, what they call fast tier and slow tier. So like the slow tier would be your hard drives, your fast tier would be your solid state, and anything around similar levels of performance. I see this somewhere probably in the solid state tier.
Yeah, I know where we work, we think of it in terms of 3 layers. You have cold storage, which is your archive stuff.
Okay.
You have your warm storage, which is like your SAN and your NAS. And then you have your hot storage, which is, the stuff that's constantly being written to and written out of.
Mm.
The hot storage is typically SSDs, the
RAM drives,
and RAM drives. Yeah, the warm storage is typically a combination of lower tier SSDs and fast hard drives, and then your cold storage is basically your slow archival drives.
Ah,
cool. I mean, it's kind of neat.
So, still, the idea of your CPU socket supporting up to 3.84 terabytes of RAM at a time is just mind-blowing to me.
And to have 4 sockets on there that you can plug into.
Yeah, and the thing is, with these motherboards, you don't have to have all the sockets filled to use them. You can fill 1 or just 2 of them and then leave the others open for future expansion.
Yeah, or future paychecks.
Right. So yeah, Cascade Lake, the future is looking bright for absolutely excessive amounts of RAM.
Hey, excessive but useful.
Fair enough. All right. Cooler Master kicked off something earlier this week, or well, right around Independence Day, actually. Cooler Master sent off a tweet to Corsair and said, "Hey Corsair, if we give away a keyboard, will you give away a mouse? Pay it forward, tag another company to add a 3rd component, and so on. Let's see how happy we can make one very lucky person." And hashtagged it with the hashtag wholesome gaming tag. And this thread just took off.
This is a huge list, man.
Yeah.
And eventually,
oh wow,
over on the r/PC Master Race Reddit, they collated all of this into a single Reddit thread called the Wholesome Gaming Giveaway, and over 60 companies, 60 various companies related to gaming, PC hardware, what have you, threw in stuff to put together not just 1, but 2 monster systems.
And several other packages too.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh.
Let's see. There's the 2 monster system packages, and they are monster. They're huge. A components package, 2 peripheral packages, including nice gaming chairs, which are cool, and then random raffles that they gave off. I mean, a list of, I'm not going to count them, but that's got to be 15, 20, 25 different raffled off items.
Was this like charity gone crazy?
Pretty much. The whole point of the Wholesome Gaming charity, it basically was a big charity drive from the tech companies. All started because Cooler Master put a tweet out there on Independence Day. And so basically they had a bunch of responses over time. You can go, I've included a link to the original thread from Cooler Master, and it is a sight to behold. And I've also included links that will be down below in the show notes to the Wholesome Gaming giveaway Reddit thread. And just, it never ceases to amaze me just how much the gaming community, when motivated to do so, is willing to be generous and willing to show that the sometimes toxic image that we're labeled with is not necessarily so.
I'm very proud of the, I say gamer community. I guess a lot of this seems to be, but really the tech community as a whole. Just a couple of years ago, really the only charity thing was Extra Life, which Extra Life is great. Don't get me wrong, support Extra Life. It's wonderful. But now, I mean, you've got random stuff like this just popping up all over the place, and a lot of them don't get this big. But for somebody who, somebody who wants to get into gaming or something like that can't afford a new computer, not to mention a decent one that'll run, say, Final Fantasy 14 on huge graphics, to get that kind of stuff just given away is incredible. And that these tech companies are willing to do it just kind of blows my mind.
Well, it's good press, right? Good
well,
PR.
That's true too. So they are getting something out of it. They're getting some press. They're getting some exposure, but nothing they couldn't have done by spending a few $1,000s on TV commercials or
That's
something
true.
like that. Or more realistically, side of the Facebook page ads, stuff like that. They're giving away hardware that they've designed to people for free, and it's cool. It's really interesting.
Plus, I kind of want to believe that a lot of these companies, especially the successful ones, there's passionate people that work there about the technology or the gaming or the industry, and a lot of times you can see that, and when you have passionate people behind all of these product stacks, they do stuff like this on occasion, and it's really cool. I agree completely. It's really nice to see.
So yeah, it's good to see something like wholesome like this appear and show the generosity of the tech community, of the gaming community. And yes, you can make the admittedly probably partially true argument that yes, it's just good PR. But I think unless part of this was genuine, you wouldn't see it done.
Or you would have had a few, but certainly you wouldn't have had the response that Corsair got from one tweet.
Yeah, exactly. Between Cooler Master and Corsair and all the other companies that were listed here.
Big ones, too. I mean, NVIDIA got in with the GeForce 1080i. I mean, big companies.
Well, these are these when they say monster system, like, they're not kidding. These are top shelf. These are above top shelf systems.
Yeah, this ain't no Raspberry Pi they're giving away.
Exactly.
Yeah, i7 8086K, which is essentially a Bend 8700K running at 5 gigahertz, a Fractal Define R6 chassis.
Yep. Trident Z RGB RAM, 1080 Ti, SSD.
Yeah.
AOC gaming monitor.
Mm-hmm.
It's even got a sound blaster in it. For Pete's sake, like.
Not to mention EK Waterblocks donating 360 millimeter rad.
Is that in there?
Yeah.
I didn't see that on the list either.
The EK Kit RGB 360.
Yeah, there it is. Wow. Okay. Nice. And then they've even got some gaming packages in here too. This GOG or 10 games thing.
Yep.
My gosh.
So,
And T-shirts, because why not?
Exactly.
because every gamer needs more t-shirts.
Hey, especially if they're going to be streaming, which, I mean, this is a good streamer PC. Both of these are.
Either of them. Because
I
the
mean-
second system, you get a 16-thread, top-of-the-line 16-thread CPU.
Yeah, and the AMD Ryzen processor, the Ryzen 7 2700X.
That thing's a beast.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Water-cooled computer. I mean, these are really interesting and high-end. Well, yeah, very much high-end stuff.
Yeah, it's good to see that when it came to this, the tech community didn't hold back.
Completely agree.
All right, moving on down the line here. This next article comes from Hexus.net. Fujitsu is going to start mass production of their NRAM technology next year.
NRAM.
So we were talking earlier about Intel's 3D crosspoint Optane memory, essentially a non-volatile RAM technology. Well, this is basically Fujitsu answering. They partnered with the US-based Nantero Incorporated to develop their own version of non-volatile DIMMs that they're calling NRAM.
So for those that don't know what non-volatile, please go ahead and explain that one. Because
Okay.
I will say I'm one of those.
Okay, so the difference between volatile RAM and non-volatile RAM. Volatile RAM means that if the power is cut, or for some reason the computer shuts down suddenly, everything that is in that RAM is lost. Because when you remove power from the device, traditional DRAM does not retain anything that was in it.
Right.
Non-volatile RAM is a version of RAM that when the system is shut down, there's a power loss, or the system powers off unexpectedly, it maintains a save state such that when the system is powered back on, everything that was in RAM before the power down, before the power loss, is still there. So traditional RAM is called volatile RAM because data can be lost, whereas non-volatile RAM is called non-volatile because data cannot be lost through a simple power outage.
Cool. That was a very concise explanation. Thank you.
And like I said earlier, there's slightly more technical explanations, but that's the gist of the idea.
So I think one of the things that's always held back technologies like NRAM and replacing DRAM has just been performance. DRAM is just so much unbelievable. Like there's just so much more bandwidth, and it performs usually in factors times better than technologies like NRAM. But now they're getting closer in performance, which that is interesting. And they're stating that it's potentially price competitive with DRAM.
And if they're able to achieve that, then we could start seeing some real competition in, RAM technologies. The big problem with 3D XPoint right now from Intel is that it is so much more expensive than NAND flash or traditional RAM.
Right. And besides that, it's also got a bunch of besides just basic like gaming and computers and stuff. As far as home computers, it's got some other applications as well. The one I was looking at that I'm personally most stoked about, using it to replace the memory chips in cars. For all the other stuff it could do, coolest thing to me, when your battery dies, you don't have to reset your clock, which is kind of cool. But, I mean, if they can get the processing speed up for that, it could use less power consumption for your car, which would help preserve battery life and things like that, especially when batteries for cars run, at least $100 for a brand new one from Walmart, a big box store. To get a really nice one, $200, $300 isn't unheard of.
Yeah, that's a good example of a use case, Matt. Actually, I don't think they're going to be able to compete in high performance workloads.
I don't think they will either. Not yet.
The DDR is just that much faster. And when you look at roadmaps for when you look at chipset roadmaps for the next 2 years, toward the end of that, you see chipset roadmaps that state DDR5. So what that means is you're looking at double the performance of DDR4 per clock. So I don't know what they would be able to do to compete with that from just a pure performance perspective.
Well,
they wouldn't be able to.
Well, Nantero has said that they've already put together a 16 gigabit DDR4 compatible design, meaning that's impressive. And the key thing, that's 16 gigabit, not gigabyte. So being 16 gigabit means it's actually a 2 gigabyte RAM chip. But the point being that in RAM, the reason they think they can get it price competitive is because it uses every nerd's favorite technology, carbon nanotubes.
Hashtag carbon, hashtag nanotube.
And so, since it does use the carbon nanotube technology, they're thinking it'll be easier to fab than traditional silicon-based alternatives.
Which means that's how they stay price competitive.
Exactly.
And as they develop it to be faster and faster and close that speed gap, possibly even better price for what you get. It could be interesting to keep a watch on for the next, 4 or 5 years, see where it goes.
Yeah, I think, having more competition in the marketplace is a good thing. I think part of the reason DDR has done as well as it has is because, well, there's 3 major manufacturers of DRAM in the world. That's Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron.
Mm-hmm.
And Intel owns Micron. So
we're trying to stay family friendly. I'm just kidding.
Well, it is Intel.
This is true.
Well, and here's something I'd like to hear y'all's thoughts on. The companies backing it are big computer companies: Cisco, Kingston, and Dell. I mean, Dell's a computer manufacturer. Do you think we could, in the next several computer building cycles, maybe see this as a natively included part in the hardware?
That comes back to use case usage, man, and consumption. If there's a competitive use case for it in a market segment, it'll be used. I can't think of a use case, at least in the consumer market, where it'd be useful.
Yeah.
Well, if I can harken back to a nearly 2-decade-old example, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a battle between traditional SD-RAM, first-generation DDR-RAM, and a technology from the Rambus Corporation called RD-RAM.
I remember.
And I actually still have in a closet somewhere a Pentium 4 Northwood core that had the final generation of RD-RAM on it. And for its time period, it was quite fast. But RD-RAM cost significantly more to manufacture than DDR-RAM did, and it required a special gold connector that other DRAM didn't.
Really?
So eventually, because of lack of support within the hardware community and from manufacturers, because SD-RAM was way cheaper and DDR-RAM was getting support from, again, the likes of Intel and Micron, we saw RD-RAM, even though on paper it was a superior technology to DDR-RAM. It used the same double data rate idea, but it implemented it differently. DDR-RAM won out because it was the cheaper alternative. So we'll just have to see whether Optane, 3D Crosspoint, or NRAM winds up being best.
It's going to be interesting to see how that all turns out. Because, when this stuff starts hitting the market, what we're going to have, or at least we'll soon have, DDR5 chipsets. Because there's a big race between, I doubt anybody will tell you this, but there's a big race between Intel and AMD about, at least in the chipset sector, about who's going to be the first to market with a DDR5 chipset. Because that's going to be a big performance boon, especially for Ryzen. So it's going to be interesting, man. There's a bunch of sectors heating up right now. I'm looking forward to it as a spectator.
Yeah.
Can I buy tickets? Any of y'all selling tickets? I want some tickets.
It's like fight night. Get you some popcorn, have dinner and a show. It could be cool.
After the hardware doldrums that the years between 2011 basically and 2017 were, it wasn't really till Ryzen came out last year that the PC hardware space really started to become competitive again. And so I'm glad to finally see us out of those hardware doldrums where Intel printing the same CPU with a 5 to 10% performance uplift was considered normal.
Yeah, quad core, new chipset, quad core.
Exactly.
There were several years in middle school I didn't know there was anything except a quad core. I legitimately didn't know something else existed. I was sure there was less. Like, there was probably a dual core and eventually you could find back a single core. But, I didn't know. It was quad core, everything.
Oh, yeah. You go back to your, the first quad cores were probably the
Core 2 quads.
Core 2 quads. And those came out, 2005, 2006?
Yep.
Yeah, and that would have been like 6th grade for me. 5th, 6th grade. So
there you go.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah.
Yep, I've got
12 years. Technically.
Sort of.
Yeah, I miss my old Q6600.
I still miss my Power Mac G4 too, but we can't always keep things.
Was that before they went to Intel? Was that when they were still on Motorola or whatever?
I don't know what they were on. It came out in like 95, I think.
Oh yeah, if it was the G4, then that would have been on some of the last PowerPC processors.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Unfortunately, we can't always keep hardware. I mean, if you got to update to a SATA hard drive eventually, you got to,
For those not aware, Matt recently had a hard drive crash in his PC, and we discovered that he was still running an IDE PETA hard drive.
But it was
from
2007, I think.
I mean, fair. That was around the time they were starting to be phased out. So
no, it's a little later than that. Because it had Windows 7 on it. Granted, he could have upgraded it from XP. I don't know. I didn't get it. I was not its first owner. So, but free hardware is free hardware. You take what you can get.
Hey, not arguing there.
Absolutely.
But
because they can put Linux on a refrigerator, you can find a use for that thing somewhere.
You probably could put Linux on one of those new touchscreen refrigerators.
You can.
Have you?
Have you? I used to. Oh gosh, we're segueing pretty hardcore, man.
This will require a Google search after the video.
So if you watch if you watch or read back on any of like the Linux conventions,
yeah,
it's like super geek fest, dude.
Oh yeah,
all of these people come from far and wide, and they bring stuff that they put Linux on.
They all crawl out of their mother's basements to get there. I know.
Yeah, and the biggest
I'm a Linux fanboy, so I got you. I watch them. But I miss the refrigerator.
Yeah.
There is a Linux-powered crock pot.
That one I saw. That one I saw.
I kid you not. There is a Linux-powered crock pot.
That's awesome.
It comes with an Android phone app.
That's fantastic.
You can use to interface with your Linux PC-powered crock pot to tell it how you want your sous vide done.
There was a guy in my it was either my senior year of high school or my first year of college, I don't remember. But he took his Apple iPod, completely wiped everything off of it, and put Linux on his iPod for whatever reason. And ran it that way. It was more efficient somehow. I don't know. His battery didn't die as often either.
That doesn't surprise me. The nice thing about Linux is that it gives you greater control over your hardware. Because it's written in C and thus is closer to the bare metal, it gives you better options for controlling the hardware.
And C is a fairly simple language to learn if you want to write your own stuff.
For varying degrees of simple.
Well, it's easier than some of the stuff I've seen.
I mean, you're not writing in assembly, but...
That's true. I don't know, I like C better than Ruby.
Ruby's...
metal. Go ahead.
Yeah. Ruby's an alright language, but it's weird. Yes, I'll just leave it at that. It's weird.
You ever watch some of those old Amiga conventions? That's when coding to bare metal, I think, kind of first came out, or at least was conceptual. Some of the stuff they did with those old Amigas is amazing.
Oh yeah, if you go download some of the demo scene stuff from the Amiga era, you'd swear it was made in the last few years.
Yeah. And when you look at the hardware specs of what they were running that code against, it's barely better than like a Sega Genesis, honestly, or Super Nintendo from the mid-90s. What they were able to do with that hardware is unbelievable. Literally coding to the metal. Coding to the metal.
Need some of those guys to do it with some of this new stuff we've got. I mean, get modern hardware, code it like that, and see where it'll take you.
Ooh, I don't know if it's possible anymore with as complicated as the hardware's gotten, and as high resolution as some of these textures are, and how much memory we're needing for a lot of these graphically intensive games. You're looking at memory footprints of almost 100 gigs sometimes. So coding to the metal with 100, I don't know, man. I don't know. I agree, though. It'd be awesome. I mean, it'd be amazing. Probably talking like holographic technology. I mean, who knows? Who knows?
Help me, Obi-Wan. You are my only hope. Yeah. All right, cool.
Speaking of low-spec hardware, though,
Ooh.
there is an Indiegogo that was launched not that long ago, on July 10th, for the world's smallest 4G rugged smartphone. I'd be interested to see what a snark phone would look like. Anyway, the world's smallest rugged 4G smartphone, the Atom. And there was an Indiegogo started by O-Gadget. And Matt, you're a little more familiar with cell phone hardware than I am, so I'll let you take the lead on this one.
Cool. Well, start from the outside and then we'll go in. When they say smallest smartphone, they mean it. It is, the whole thing is smaller than my old iPhone 4's screen to some extent. It is 1.7 inches horizontally, less than 4 inches up and down. I mean, that's it. That's all it is. And it's not even a full inch thick. 2.45 inch display, which is tiny. It's about yay big, I'd say, which is really interesting. But for all of that, it's really neat. It can run on pretty much any of the standard tower types that we use in America. So if you run on, say, AT&T or Net 10, something like that, it can run the GSM towers. If you run on Page Plus, if you run on Verizon, it can run the CDMA towers. So being unlocked like that, it can also be used not just here in America, but on the GSM towers worldwide, which is really cool. It's a true international phone. And for something that small, it has a 2 gigahertz 8-core octa-core processor, which is really cool for something that small.
Now, is that a Snapdragon derivative, or is that a Apple type thing or something else?
Now, I have no clue. Their Indiegogo does not say whether it's a Snapdragon, so they don't know. Excuse me. They didn't state whether it was a Qualcomm derivative or an Apple derivative or Samsung maybe. They didn't say. All they said is that it's an octa-core 2 gigahertz. I would assume, with this being an Android phone, that it's probably some form of Qualcomm derivative, even if it doesn't come from the Snapdragon line.
If I had to put my money on it, knowing what I do, what little I do, if they don't put Qualcomm in front of it, I'm betting it's either going to come from Rockchip or MediaTek.
Right. It probably doesn't, for that exact reason, I would say the same thing. Probably doesn't come directly from Qualcomm, but it could be derived from one of their designs, quite possibly, depending on who made it. And I would think that would probably be the way they go with that. Like all modern smartphones, well, most modern, newest flagship smartphones, it's got a fingerprint reader, which on this thing is tiny, like the rest of the phone, but takes up pretty well the entire bottom bezel, which is kind of neat. It's basically full size for my thumb with a phone that's not even the size of my hand, which is cool. And for those of you who don't like carrying heavy phones like the 7 Pluses or the Note 8s, things like that, 0.23 pounds. 108 grams. That's it. That's all it weighs.
Wow.
Yeah, I could go on with this for hours, but I will for a few more minutes at least. The memory is 4 full gigabytes of RAM with 64 gigabytes of ROM, and I'm not finding it on here, but I would assume, with it being the type of phone that it is, that it has an expandable memory slot. Probably in the dual SIM tray. And now it's dual SIM standby, which is really the only thing on this phone that I would like to see something different. As far as I'd rather see the dual SIM active. But really, most of your big ones that aren't Samsung are dual SIM standby. So your OnePlus, your OnePlus 6, your OnePlus X, your OnePlus 5, and all the similar stuff like that, they're all going to be dual SIM standbys, which is great for people who, say, work out of the country or travel a lot, that kind of stuff.
Nice. Yep. What about people with fat fingers like me?
It looks like, out of everything else, it looks like you're out of luck.
I have problems with so I have a Galaxy S8. I have problems with this thing, man.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Now it does support Bluetooth version 4, so I'm sure you could hook up a Bluetooth keyboard if you had that big of a problem.
My tune.
Or some sort of vocal assistant. It is running Android 8.1 Oreo, which is one of the newest ones, if not the newest one. I'd have to look at that.
Nice.
And on par with the current iPhone flagships, IP68 waterproofing, which is incredible. Besides that, 2,000 milliamp battery, which for something that small is pretty well going to be the biggest you can fit in there. Should last a while, though, I would think. USB Type-C plugins, proximity sensor, gyroscope, compass. I mean, all the fancy bells and whistles. Got all of them. Hooks up to Wi-Fi. It's got a GPS. It even has a built-in FM radio that works right out of the box. And unlike the Apple flagships, 3.5mm headphone jack. Thank you, Adam, because that's fantastic. I get tired of having to use that little dongle thing.
Dongle. You said dongle.
That's what it's called. Shut up. And the coolest thing, there's two really interesting, besides all of that, things on it. It is Corning Gorilla Glass, so the Mohs hardness scale.
Very nice.
It scratches at a 6, light scratches at a 6, true scratches at a 7, gouges at a 7, which is really, really, really good for something like that. The only things that scratch much harder than a 7 or an 8 is going to be, again, the iPhone with their sapphire glass camera covering usually scratches somewhere from an 8 to a 9. Diamonds scratch at a 10, so if you don't know the scale, that's kind of where you're at.
Nice.
And the display, while being tiny, is very crisp, 2.45 inches, but it is 240 by 432 pixels, which sounds like not a lot, but it's pretty good for something that small. It does look nice in the videos and all that they've got out. And if you like taking camera pictures with your phone, 16 megapixel rear main camera and the front selfie camera, 8 megapixels, which is incredible for something, like I said, this big. It's this big. Phenomenal cosmic power, itty bitty living space.
Right.
So, as you can tell, probably I'm a dork about phones. I love them. So,
Boss? Screen size kills it for me, though, honestly.
I would have it as a backup phone, or like if I were to go out of the country, I would totally have one, because who cares at that point?
Yeah.
But I would probably not carry one as an everyday driver kind of thing. However, if they made that technology in a full-size phone, goodbye iPhone, I'm switching to the Atom. I mean, that's a really interesting phone. I would say so. At least to give it a shot for a while.
Okay. Test drive for a bit.
I would definitely test drive it for at least 6 months.
Okay.
I would give it that. If it were, at least bigger. It doesn't have to be the size of the iPhone Pluses, but I would like to see a version the size of maybe a Galaxy S4, or even a little bit smaller at the iPhone 6, regular 6.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I see something like the Atom as something that my dad would use. For those who don't know, my dad is a farmer. He is constantly out every day. He's the type who still uses a Casio G-Zone flip phone, because that particular phone he has dropped in the creek twice and run over with his tractor once, and it still works.
Needs to get him a Kyocera Indestructo. Those things are really cool too.
But yeah, so I could see the Atom as something he would be willing to use, because he doesn't want a smartphone. We've tried to get him to upgrade to a smartphone several times, and he's like, I don't need anything that's smarter than me. That's his line every time.
I don't need them newfangled gadgets.
But something like this that he could fit in the same pocket that he puts his lighter in, that he puts his pocket knife in, that's something I think he'd be more amenable to. And the price is right.
Even I'm sorry, go ahead.
On the Indiegogo, if you back it now, you can get the phone by itself for $239 USD.
It's not bad.
Now, the MSRP, the list price for when it actually comes out, is only $299. So even then, that's great. And of course, you can upgrade it to get a clip for it and stuff like that, which is kind of neat. Got an armband too. Use it like an oversized smartwatch.
Yeah, with a 2.54-inch display or 4.5-inch display, that's not an out-of-the-way use case. I mean, they even illustrate it being able. They illustrate an armband mount you can get. It's designed to go on your bicep, but I could see you mounting it to your forearm instead and using it that way.
And like a lot of phones this size, it does support full 4G LTE data on whatever network you put it on, which is cool. Now, there was something here that I missed until just a second ago. I should have read a little closer because this is probably the best feature of the phone. Oh, well, oops, my bad. They've got what they call USB on the go for this phone. So you plug in your cable to the Type-C port that it's got, and then you have this little box that the other side of the cable connects to. And that's there on the go. And it will connect to flash drives, so you can download, say, your pictures, or if you save documents on your phone. Some people do that. I used to do that on my Galaxy. You can put it onto a flash drive to then take to a computer to print out or whatever it is you want to do. You can connect game controllers if you want to play a game on a 2.4-inch screen. I don't know why you would, unless you're doing it with a monocle using one eye or something. Get two of them, virtual reality. You can connect a mouse, or like I said earlier, a keyboard. Even a non-wireless keyboard can be connected to it via the USB Go. Or, excuse me, USB on the go.
And I would bet that's why you don't see anything about a micro SD slot, is because they're banking on the fact that if you want to get anything off the phone, you're probably going to use the USB on the go functionality to a flash drive.
That's quite possible. Though I will say, not 100% of them, but the majority of the phones that I see that have dual SIM cards, particularly the dual nano SIMs, typically one of those spaces is going to be the size and shape that you could put either the SIM card or a memory card of some sort in. Not always, but I would say 90% of the ones that I have personally seen.
Fair enough.
You ever wondered what the use cases are for those dual SIM phones?
The use case typically is for people who travel a lot, particularly out of the country. So, like, if you lived near the Canadian border and you had to go over the border a lot, even if you lived only 5 miles from Canada, as soon as you cross that border, you're hit with roaming charges. So what you have is you have two SIM cards, one for in Canada use and one for in the United States use. And when you get up there, you switch which one is your main active SIM, so that you're not hit with these huge roaming charges, but you also don't have to carry two phones. You don't have to remember, oh, I grabbed this phone. Oh, no, that picture's on that phone. This document's saved here. You don't have to remember any of that crap. You just put your one phone in your pocket and you go wherever you're going.
Or I think you said business use, casual use.
It is cool for casual use. If you're traveling around, I mean, even if you're just traveling for pleasure, you're on vacation or something, that's pretty well what that's for. Is, like, for example, when I go to school, there's a lot of people that get internships out of state, sometimes out of country, and their phones will work, but it charges them. AT&T really needs to fix their roaming prices and their international charges. It's insane. So what they'll do is they'll go, if they're going to France, they'll go to France and they'll buy a French SIM card, stick it in their phone, and move on. Problem is they might lose theirs because they're tiny. You got a dual SIM phone, you don't even have to switch them out. You can just, you hit a button and they switch back and forth as to which one's the main card.
Yeah, those micro or those nano SIMs are tiny, tiny.
Yeah, the nano SIMs are really small.
Yeah, I saw an interesting use case regarding marital issues for dual SIMs phones. I won't get into that.
Well, the only issue with that becomes if they get a hold of your phone, they have both cards. So they can still read any message you have.
Yeah, that's true.
And if you have a memory card in there, your messages are not saved on a network card. They're actually saved on your phone's hard drive. So even if you're like, oh, okay, well, my wife wants, or my girlfriend, my wife, whatever, wants to get into my phone, let me take out the one that I use for my side chick. She still can read every message if you don't delete them.
Wow.
Remember, ladies and gentlemen, we are a wholesome Christian gaming channel.
Yeah, we don't
And we
condone
do not
God.
advocate this use case.
Praise God.
which is why we're telling you don't do it, because it won't work anyway.
Yes.
Anyway,
My
moving
inside
on.
voice comes outside sometimes. I'm sorry.
So sorry guys, I got lost in the cross-examined for a minute.
So, moving on. There was an article on Tom's Hardware this week that I thought was a little bit clickbaity, but it's still news. Western Digital is shutting down one of their hard drive factories in Malaysia.
Mm. Yeah, I remember reading this. Yeah, you're right. It is very clickbaity.
So they originally opened this factory in, and I'm going to butcher this, Petaling Jaya, Malaysia, in 1973. It's a 1 million square foot facility that has been basically manufacturing hard drives for them ever since. However, they are finally closing down this particular plant. However, they still have 2 other facilities in Thailand, as well as another plant owned by their subsidiary, HGST Technologies, Malaysia, in Bayan Lepas. Not to mention, last year, Western Digital formed an alliance, or excuse me, a strategic joint venture with Toshiba. So the article kind of leads you to believe from the headline that, oh no, Western Digital isn't going to make hard drives anymore. No, they're just shutting down their oldest hard drive plant in favor of keeping active their newer facilities that also produce SSDs. And since they are doing a joint venture with Toshiba, who also makes hard drives, you can bet that they're probably going to be using some of that fab space to make Western Digital drives.
Yeah, but I think the gist of the article is that they're still making hard drives, but what they're doing is they're shifting more resource focus. So they're streamlining a little bit, but then they're shifting more resource focus on SSD and NAND manufacturing versus hard drive. They're still selling hard drives and making them, but they're shifting more focus over to flash drives, basically. And from what I understand, that the Toshiba, I think, makes the controller, so it's almost like a rebadged Toshiba product in some cases.
Right. So the thing about the Toshiba alliance, the strategic joint venture, most people don't remember this, but Toshiba bought out memory and SSD manufacturer OCZ back in 2014, right. I believe.
Didn't they buy a SanDisk too? Or they were looking at them. I remember that.
They were looking at buying SanDisk. I don't think that purchase went through. But they bought OCZ. And for a while, you could get OCZ by Toshiba drives. And eventually, they just dropped OCZ as a brand. Because OCZ, unfortunately, even though they'd done some great stuff and were one of the great early brands to get when consumer SSDs started becoming big, they had unfortunately developed a little bit of a reputation for being less than reliable. Although their Barefoot 3 controller is still being used as a base for further development by Toshiba. So there is that. And so it would not surprise me to see more of these Toshiba-driven drives popping up under the Western Digital brand name.
Yeah, okay. I can see that.
Well, when I've read reviews of the Western Digital Blue and the black drives, they're pretty good. And when you look them up From a pricing perspective, they're very price competitive, and in some cases, they beat the pricing competition. Like the Black Drive is basically an NVMe. When you're looking at M.2 storage, it's going to be comparable to some of the upper tier NVMe based or controller based M.2 drives. It's not as fast as the 970, but very few are. But still, it's not priced that way. It's very price competitive. I've actually considered them several times when I've been building. So they're not bad products, I don't think.
Yeah, there was a while back when hard drives were still the dominant form of storage that I was a pure Seagate guy. I would not buy Western Digital drives
Mm.
because I'd heard too many bad stories, and every Seagate drive I've ever had done me well. Well, there was a period there when Seagate manufactured 1.5 terabyte and 3 terabyte drives that had abysmal rates of failure. And it was mostly due to the fact that they had an odd number of platters. Not odd as in not even, but odd as in an unusual number of platters.
Hmm.
And so that's when I started buying Western Digital and other drives. HGST, which is now owned by Western Digital, the Hitachi drives were the ones I used for a while because they had a good reliability. Now they're about the same as Western Digital. Basically, I generally tend to buy the drive that's the most cost effective at the time anymore.
Well, I think Hitachi bought IBM's. Is that right? I think Hitachi bought IBM's hard drive division, which at a period in time they were like the performance kings in the hard drive sector. And they were pretty good. And then Hitachi bought them, and Hitachi had a couple of lines that were less than ideal from a failure rate perspective.
Yes, I remember the old Hitachi Death Stars.
Yes, yes, because they were desk stars, but they were Death Stars. Yeah,
Because they'd typically be dead within a week.
right, right. I had a Raptor drive once. That thing was crazy fast. 10,000 RPM
Yeah,
before SATA or before
right.
SSD. Yeah.
Yeah, those were basically enterprise 2.5-inch drives that they stuck a fancy heatsink on, massively upcharged.
Oh my gosh, they were expensive. They look so good though. That big old heat sink around there, it looked mean.
Oh,
But
it
then
did.
but then as soon as you get your first SATA, it's like, where have you been all my life? Now I've gone SSD, I'll never go back. Like, so.
Yeah, I remember. I do remember my first SSD. My first SSD was a 90 gigabyte Corsair Force F3 drive that I got on a Black Friday sale in 2011.
I am really far behind not having an SSD, aren't I? Wow. All right.
They're pretty affordable anymore. Like if you look at I think you're looking at $50 or less for 256.
I'm just one of these guys that, like, if my computer works and I like the way it works, I don't think about updating it until something breaks. So
Fair enough.
until it broke, there was no reason for me to, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, kind of thing. I
Right.
don't use it for anything. I don't do software development or anything. So it's not like I've got to have the newest of everything.
Right, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. But still, I mean, y'all are making me want to go buy one on Amazon right now.
In fact, not to interrupt, but in fact, one thing that you can do is you can get so if you're building a new system, or if you have a system with a Ryzen 2000 series processor with an X470 based motherboard, I'm not sure about B450 yet, but you get a tiering application from AMD called Store MI. And what you can do is you can combine up to 256 gig SSD with a hard drive and combine that with up to 2 gigs of RAM, and you can have one partition essentially, and it analyzes the whole partition, and it moves things in and out of the fast storage, being either however much RAM you give it for caching, or your SSD, and it's one massive partition, and that's what I've got running on this, and it feels like a 2.2. So I've got a 2 terabyte drive, a 2 terabyte old Seagate Barracuda, which is like a tank, and then I've got a 256 gig SATA 850 Evo SSD, and then I've given it 2 gigs of RAM for one big massive partition, and it's one partition, which is 2.2 terabytes basically, and it feels like the entire thing is an SSD.
It kind of reminds me of the Apple Fusion drives that they've come out with, where they're, if it's two terabytes, we'll say, then 1 terabyte of it is SSD, and then 1 terabyte is standard disk, whatever style that Apple uses. I'm not sure as of right now, but it keeps stuff on the faster SSD, and as long as you're using it regularly, if you don't use it regularly, it moves it on its own to almost like an archival storage type system.
Yeah, the Fusion drives are basically an all-in-one version of the old caching systems.
Right.
I actually used a SanDisk cache drive for a while on a lower-end machine. It had like a 500 gig hard drive, and I got the little SanDisk 32 gig caching drive, and it basically did the exact same thing you mentioned. The Fusion drives do.
How's your user experience with that? Was it pretty good? Did they have any issues?
You could note in applications that you used often, which this was an office machine, so this was just like my productivity suite stuff, Microsoft Office, Excel, that stuff. It was really snappy compared with just the hard drive because it was the stuff I used all the time. But you could tell a distinct difference between the stuff that had been cached on the cache SSD and the stuff that was still on the hard drive, even though it was a 7,200 RPM hard drive.
Well, I've used StoreMI since I built this new computer. I'm so convinced of it, and from reviews that I've read, I'm so convinced of it that when I build my kid's mini ITX system, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get a 2.5-inch little laptop hard drive, whatever I can find for $50-$60, like 1 or 2 terabyte, whatever. And then I'll get a 256 gig SSD, probably an M.2, and then I'll give them maybe a gig of RAM, and then put all of that onto one partition, because they're not savvy enough to move things from, say, like a data partition to C or back and forth. They're used to one partition, and that's exactly how I'll install it. And I need something that's reliable for them, and it's fantastic so far, especially because it's free, but it's fantastic.
Well, when you build theirs, let me know how that goes for what they do.
Okay, we'll do. I'm just building in a Ryzen APU system for them.
Okay.
So
yeah. You said they don't do much but like Minecraft, Sims, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I'll let you know. I'll include a parts list and stuff. Probably
Sweet.
be around sometime between now and December when I build it. But, yeah, I'll let you know.
All right. Sounds good.
So speaking of AMD and of StoreMI, I'm going to hop over the Intel Coffee Lake stuff for a second, since this is directly relevant to what we're just talking about. AMD board partners have announced their budget-friendly B450 motherboard lineup.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh, I like the words budget-friendly.
Oh, yeah.
So, for those who aren't familiar with the first-generation Ryzen chips, AMD launched a three-tier approach. You had the top-of-the-line X370 line, which was designed to have all the bells and whistles. Then you had the mid-tier B350 line, which still allowed overclocking and was designed for enthusiasts on a budget. And then you had the entry-level A320 line, which was not really designed for any kind of enthusiast work, but was designed for your average workaday PC. Well, they continue that naming scheme with the 400 series chipset, and so they're just now releasing the B450 motherboards. Now, that's a good thing, because if their pricing is similar to what went on with the B350 boards, you could get a high-quality B350 board for between $60 to $80. Pair that with a Ryzen 7 chip, a 1700 at about $250, and have the base for a real powerhouse system for just over $300 out the door.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredible.
So the idea of B450 finally getting out there, the article we have linked is from WCCF Tech, but it shows pictures and describes the product stacks for Asus, MSI, and Gigabyte.
There's some real gems in there.
Yeah, Asus ASRock, Aorus, which is Gigabyte's gaming brand. MSI. Let's see, who else?
There's some ASRock. Asus,
it looks like they have obviously ASRock, Asus, Gigabyte, and MSI listed here. But when it comes to budget motherboards, I've really been impressed, in particular with the B350 boards, but now also their B450 equivalents. The real standouts to me are from Asus, the B450 Plus, I believe it was called.
B450 Plus. I need to look at that.
Yes, the B450 Plus Tough Gaming, which comes in a bit of a...
You said tough. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
The branding Asus has used their Tough, or the Unstoppable Force, TUF branding, from all the way back with, I remember the original 990FX Sabertooth Tough Edition.
That was a very good board.
I loved that board.
I had that board on an 8320 that I had overclocked every day at 4.6 gigahertz. That thing was a tank, and it still had headroom. Highest I ever got on that board was 4.8. I clocked it down to 4.6 for every day. It was a tank.
So I'm glad to see they're continuing the Tough series branding with the Tough gaming line, the B450 Plus Tough Gaming. I like the look of that board. The black, relatively neutral look with just the tiny yellow accents. I like the look of that board. Plus, it's a full ATX and has 4 slots for RAM. And so there's also the B450M Plus Tough Gaming, which is its MATX equivalent. And the other one that interests me is actually from ASRock, and it's the B450 Gaming ITX.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I really don't agree with Tough, and I really don't like the way Asus has kind of gone downhill. With Tough, that Sabertooth was such a great board. The Tough board is not good. I'm so sorry. I don't like Tough. I'm sorry, Mr. Ned. I love you like a brother, man, but I can't agree with Tough. I can't agree with Tough. I want to like it. I really do. It's not good.
I mean, I understand. They've kind of focused everything into the ROG Strix branding. Yeah. That's where they put all the high-end stuff. It's just, I cannot stand... I'm not a big fan of the glitzy, glammy, ROG Strix stuff. I understand it's where they've put all the high end stuff. I want something that's a little more neutral.
Prime
But
B450 doesn't have a heatsink on the VRMs.
yeah, that's my big problem with the Prime line. The
Oh,
one thing I will give the Tough brand, it's not a very big heat sink, but at least it's a heat sink. But the thing that's really impressed me though, as a person, admittedly, I have a bias here because I own a Aorus X370 Gaming 5 from Gigabyte. The Aorus boards of late have impressed me.
they've been good.
And I do like the look. I generally like the look of the B450 Aorus M. I like the M-ATX 4-factor. And I think that's going to be a solid option in the near future.
So the only thing that scares me, there's a lot of really good B450s in here, I think. The only thing that scares me is that if somebody gets like the Tough board or some of these boards that have really weak VRM, they're probably going to be okay for like a 4-core. They'll be fine for that. Be fine for like a lower end 6-core if you just want to run it stock, no problem. But if you buy a 2700X and you throw it on something with really weak VRM, I would be really worried for that buyer. Especially if they try to get any kind of performance out of it, because it's stock. At stock, the 2700X will run up if it's got a heavy workload. It will eat 120 watts of power, and that's a big VRM hit. I can tell you with PBO overclocking on my Aorus Gaming, which is a 470 budget board, but it's still got a very solid VRM on it. In fact, I need to cool the VRM, and it's got really good heat sinks on it. But I've seen workloads hit 165 watts on that thing, and to kind of segue a bit, if you look at the 2400G, which is the Ryzen 5 APU, the beefy Vega 11. So one of the things people are doing with that is they're overclocking the APU, and they're running like 3600 memory. But to do that, they need to overclock so when on that particular chip, when you run higher speed memory, it's basically applying an overcore voltage on the graphics processor or the APU part. And it's not uncommon for that kind of tuning for that processor to eat 200 to 250 watts. So what people often overlook is they often overlook SoC VRM, which if you have at least a decent 3-phase design, you're okay. I think one of the things you can do to tune it is just get higher speed RAM and then supply maybe an overvolt, like a very minor overvolt on those APUs, and then you can keep it down pretty decent because those Vega cores are so starved for memory bandwidth. But I worry that people will get those 2700Xs and be mad because they set at 3.6 and 3.7 gigahertz. When, if they would have spent like $20 or $30 more on a motherboard, they could have seen it boosting around 4.1 to 4.2 all day long. So that's kind of the awesome thing about the B450 range, is that there's some amazing gems in here, man. But there's also some really big stinkers too. I don't know. The Tough board kind of scares me, man. I'm sorry.
Maybe I'm just nostalgic for my old Tough 990 FX.
Yeah, you're so right about that thing. That thing was amazing. That was amazing. And they had some gems too with the Sabertooth Intel boards, man. But oof. There's some really good ones in here though, like some of the some of the mid to higher end MSIs. Most of the AS rocks are really good, but then the BIOSes are kind of clunky. But they usually have pretty solid build quality and pretty good VRM and VRM heatsinks. Gigabytes are going to be good, especially the upper. There's a really good B450 in here I saw.
The B450 Aorus Pro Wi-Fi. That one, even though it's a B450 board, that looks really similar to what I've seen out of the X470 boards.
Yeah, so the Gigabyte X470, they have the Gaming 5 and then the Ultra Gaming. Both of those are exactly the same. Only difference is one's got Wi-Fi and the other doesn't. They have the exact same VRM, same BIOS, or very similar, same heatsinks, and I think this B450 board's got the exact same VRM, the exact same layout. Like when you start breaking down a lot of the subsystems, they're exactly the same. I think the only thing they did was they slapped a different chipset in there. Obviously a different BIOS, but that's a solid VRM. Very solid, especially B450. You put a 2700X in there, no problem.
Good to know.
Sorry,
all right.
I'm kind of passionate about it.
Hey.
Hey, if I can go off on a tangent on the phones, I mean, you can definitely go off on the boards.
Oh, there's so many good boards in here, though.
Yeah, they look really cool.
Sorry, I'm going to be on this page for a bit.
Okay. So, in the meantime, we do have one more news item before we get to our first big story. And, well, given our time constraints, we may just focus on that one big story because it is kind of a big deal. But we got one more little bit of news. This is a rumor, actually, about Intel. So we've seen previous confirmation that the 9th generation of Intel Core i series processors are going to be basically a Coffee Lake refresh. Much like they did with Devil's Canyon during the Haswell era, it looks like this is going to be a refresh of Coffee Lake. There's not been an official name attached to this generation yet. So everyone's still calling them the Coffee Lake refresh. But there is rumor of a Core i9 9900K 8-core processor coming to the mainstream Z370 and Z390 chipsets. With 6-core soldered IHS chips with up to 5.5 gigahertz.
Yeah, so solder, for people who don't know, was it since Ivy Bridge?
Yes.
I want to say since Ivy Bridge. So since Ivy Bridge, people have been complaining, or if you want to say it nicely, requesting that Intel get rid of the heat paste and use solder again, because when you delid these, you get huge performance increases in cooling. And I want to say now with Coffee Lake, delidding has probably hit its climax, because people are able to get, I mean, you go through forum posts and YouTube videos and stuff, and you often see like, delidded my processor, use liquid metal or something else that's
20 to 30 degree C drops.
Yes. That's huge. That's like an extra 500 megahertz. Or undervolting and huge power savings, and still getting mad crazy overclocks. Super stable. So yeah, it does not at all surprise me that they're finally listening. I mean, that was a huge selling point with Devil's Canyon, with those i5s and i7s. People got really good overclocks out of those. I had one. Loved it. Almost didn't buy the Ryzen because of it. It's huge. I'd be happy if they just put them in the K parts, honestly.
Yeah.
You know what
Recently, I was going through some old hardware of mine and found my old i7-2600K. Now, i7-2600K was from Sandy Bridge, which was the last family of processors to be soldered to have the heat spreader soldered to the CPU die. So you can't delid those, but Sandy Bridge was famous for the extremely high overclocks you could get.
Yeah.
You know, this was during a time period where the base clocks on Intel processors were like 3.5 gigahertz. Whereas, you know, today it's closer to 4 gigahertz. But Sandy Bridge, with proper cooling, was capable of hitting 4.7, 4.8 gigahertz.
Nice.
And you would see forum posts all the time of people running Core i5 2500 and Core i7 2600Ks at 4.5 gigahertz with almost no effort.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas today, a Core i7 8700K of the latest Coffee Lake generation struggles to hit 5 gigahertz with massive power consumption, all because the thermal interface material, the TIM, is basically toothpaste.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. You'll see people spending $800 on a cooling apparatus or system, basically water cooling, like a monster water cooling rig, and still not hitting 5.6 or 4.6 or 4.7 gigahertz because of that heat paste that they put in there. And they delid their processor. Oh my gosh, I'm running 5.2 gigahertz all day long. It's amazing. So, yeah, honestly, I'm kind of surprised it's taken this long.
I mean, the other part of the rumor is that Coffee Lake Refresh is supposed to be launching on August 1st.
That is soon.
And so, if this indeed is going to be the Coffee Lake Refresh that everyone is that most of the intelligence that we've gathered seems to indicate, basically, I don't think we'll see a huge performance difference from their Coffee Lake 8000 series counterparts. The previous leaks that have come out seem to indicate that they're basically going to be identical in instructions per clock, but that they're going to feature 1 to 200 megahertz frequency bumps.
It's probably another slight improvement in process, which Intel 14 nanometer is very, very good. It's probably the best 14 nanometer in the world.
Right, because they've basically... Remember, they started using 14 nanometer all the way back in 2014 with Broadwell.
Mm-hmm.
And originally, it was supposed to be Broadwell, Skylake, Kaby Lake were supposed to be the only 3 generations to use 14 nanometer. But Intel has been having so many problems moving to the 10 nanometer process that they decided that Coffee Lake and Cannon Lake, which were originally going to be 10 nanometer process CPUs, would simply be further iterations on 14 nanometer, which is why Coffee Lake is referred to as 14 nanometer plus plus.
Plus, plus, plus.
And so
I think the sexy bits, right? I think the real good bits about this Coffee Lake or Skylake plus 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 launch is going to be, if they do the solder, that's going to be amazing and awesome. And then that 8-core part. And maybe 2800X? Maybe?
Awesome.
Ryzen?
I mean,
Ryzen 2800X? I don't know, there's rumors, but who knows?
it would not surprise me. I think right now AMD's focused on Threadripper 2 coming out in either August or September.
Mm.
But it would not surprise me that if Intel does come out with a Core i9 9900K, it would be no surprise for me to see a AMD response with a Ryzen 7 2800X with say 4 gigahertz base clock and like 4.4 gigahertz boost with XFR.
Yeah, I don't know how much, because being a 2700X owner, the auto tuning on that processor is so aggressive. I don't know what more they could do. You can't overclock it higher than its auto tuning. I've never seen that on a processor ever. The first time. In fact, to overclock it well, you basically have to tune the auto tune, which is precision boost overclocking. Like massaging that and then playing around with voltage. And it's a chore, but it does produce some interesting results. But
that and messing with Infinity Fabric and your memory timings.
Right. I don't know what more they can do. I mean, I don't know. It would be interesting. I don't know. Maybe they've been holding back like the top 5% of their bins, for a potential response. I'm sure
it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, that's basically what Intel did so that they could launch the 8086K, which is just a binned 8700K.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's how they've manufactured their at least first gen Threadripper cores. Was the top 5% of their first gen Ryzen bins were reserved for Threadripper first, and then anything else in the product stack after.
Right.
So, which is part of the reason why those things are so amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I can't wait for Threadripper 2. I saw a 1950X on sale the other day for like $650.
Yeah, if I had had the money, I would have gotten one. Just because.
I know. You're right, Matt. It was not bad. It was not bad. 16 cores, 32 threads,
yeah,
$650.
I'm looking at the Threadripper 2 myself. I really... Oh, man, I wish my job paid more money.
Yeah, it's Moss dollars, but that's a lot of value. That's a lot of value. Especially if you need it. You can't... There's nothing better for that. Man. It's going to be interesting. The next 2 months, it's going to be some stuff coming down the pipe. Mr. Ned, Mr. Matt, it's going to be some interesting stuff coming down.
Indeed. But the PC side of things is not the only one who's gotten a tech upgrade of late.
Oh, yeah?
Apple recently released their new 2018 MacBooks. Or MacBook Pros.
Oh.
And they feature some pretty good specs. We now have available as options on the 15-inch model the Core i9 8950HK.
8950.
Yeah.
It's basically a 6-core, 12-thread mobile CPU running at 45 watts, I believe. That's typically paired with the AMD Radeon Pro 560X. And in general, specs-wise, given that it has 2 additional cores versus the Kaby Lake predecessor, you'd think it would generally perform better than its counterparts. Only early reviews are showing that the 6-core MacBook Pro model actually performs worse than the 2017 model because it is overheating and thermal throttling.
I wonder how long it takes to desolder the soldered RAM and to desolder the soldered SSDs on those things.
Oh, while. My boss had to do one a while back, last couple of weeks ago, on an older one, and it was just nasty.
So,
What are they calling the new MacBook Pros? The Volcano?
huh,
Bad joke.
Well, the only I've only heard a couple of things that people have called them. None of them can I repeat on air. So no, I take it back. Somebody called it the Fireball because they wanted to throw it across the room.
Hadouken?
Something like that, yeah.
yes.
Coming
soon, the MacBook Pro Hadouken. Oh, but all this started when a YouTuber by the name of Dave Lee, who runs the D2D channel, bought the latest and greatest Apple MacBook Pro to review it for his channel. And he does a lot of Adobe Premiere Pro and, kind of the prosumer work, the professional consumer who is kind of in that in-between state, who maybe he or she runs a YouTube channel and does professional work there, but also wants to run consumer workloads on his MacBook Pro. And so he took his 2017 MacBook Pro, which had a quad-core Intel Core i7-7920HQ, against his brand new 2018 model, which has the 6-core Core i9-8950HK. He ran them both through the same Adobe Premiere Pro render, and the MacBook Pro 15 28 edition took nearly 6 minutes longer.
That is quite a significant time frame, yeah. Yikes.
So he was thinking it had to be thermal throttling because he noticed that within a few seconds of putting it under that Adobe Premiere load, the Core i9 throttled down not to its base speed of 2.9 gigahertz, but to its minimum core clock of 2.2 gigahertz.
Thermal issues have been a bane of MacBooks forever. Hot running and MacBook almost go like hand in hand anymore.
Hey, as the owner of an early 2011 MacBook Pro with the Sandy Bridge based mobile processor, that was the model that had the desolder problem, where literally the processor would get so hot that it would desolder itself from the logic board because the cooling solution was insufficient. Admittedly, I still have mine today because I have taken mine and I have babied it and put new thermal paste on it and tinkered with it.
Water cooled it.
Hey, I thought about it.
I bet. I don't know. They call themselves a premier brand. I don't know.
The funniest thing is I've linked the video in the show links, which you can find down below in the description. The funniest thing is that when he ran the 2017 MacBook Pro, it took 35 minutes and 22 seconds to render the video. When he ran it on the 2018 model, the same 6-core part took 39 minutes and 37 seconds. So he was curious what the issue is. And so he went and took his 2018 MacBook Pro and stuck it in the freezer. I kid you not. In the freezer, it ran the same render in 27 minutes and 18 seconds. So the problem is not the CPU. The problem is the thermal solution.
Yep, it's cooling.
Just the fact that he thought of sticking it in the freezer, though, is kind of great. I mean...
Yeah.
I mean, it illustrates the fact that the thermal solution on the current MacBook Pro 15 is inadequate. And that says a lot about where Apple's kind of focus is with the MacBook Pro. I mean, think about
It's hard to say.
if this were Dell or HP or Asus doing the same kind of thing. There would be a mass revolt.
They would also fix it fairly quickly.
Yeah.
This is true too.
Under warranty.
Yeah. I mean, they'd fix it for you for nothing.
The problem is most of the Apple demographic will blame themselves before they blame the product. This must be something I'm doing.
I must be doing something wrong. Or
Right.
they'll, even if they do know, they'll go, oh, it must be the chipset. It must be Intel.
Right.
When it's not. It's just Apple doesn't know how to cool its computers off. Apple has no chill.
Chill.
Tagline for the video: Apple has no
Yeah.
chill.
Exactly.
I try. Anyway.
Apple MacBooks exploding.
I mean, Apple, I hope you learn from the Samsung Galaxy Note 7.
Right. Apple
There's
doesn't
no more to that
learn.
sentence.
Apple doesn't learn. You need these massive class action lawsuits before they even warranty something. So
Well, they've got one of those in the works for never mind. That's a whole nother topic, which would be a great one, but they don't even learn then. They don't care. They just pay it and do it again.
I know. Well, their entire business.
Their entire business model is hipsters and graphic artists, basically.
I don't want to get into a segue.
Okay.
Not to say anything.
You left out software developers, but
Yeah. Their entire business model
like I
is
said,
around
hipsters.
replace it. Their entire business model is we don't support it, you replace it.
Built-in obsolescence. Yeah.
Replace it. Well, you bring it in for a bad key, and we'll replace it with a refurbished one. You have a bad laptop, so you need to buy the new one.
Which to me doesn't make sense because they make their stuff so darn easy to fix. I don't understand why they would replace it when it could be fixed so much easier. I mean, sorry, I'm segueing now. My bad.
So before we get too far afield, we do have one more topic to cover this evening. So a couple of weeks ago, actually last time, Jason, you were able to be on the show, we discussed Threadripper 2.
Oh, yeah.
And specifically the 2990X.
Sweet.
Well, we have new leaks about Threadripper 2.
Sweet. Awesome.
In particular, the X Fastest conference that was held in China around the 9th of July, Gigabyte released a motherboard slide verifying that their X399 Aorus Extreme board would support the upcoming AMD TR2 32-core, 64-thread, 250-watt TDP processors. And so we have confirmation from the previous leaks that Threadripper 2 is looking to be in its highest form, in its highest end 2990X form, to be a 250-watt CPU.
Which, well, when you do the math, I mean, that number might sound alarming, but when you do the math, 32 cores, 64 threads, that's actually very efficient. And there are going to be workloads where that thing's going to eat probably 300, 350 watts.
Yep.
And if you tune it, you're probably looking at 400. Depending on how you tune it and how you work it.
Got some serious heat sinks on it though, which is nice running that kind of workload.
Massive package too.
3 heat sinks. Yeah, and they're a huge package.
Yeah, like credit card size.
Yeah.
Or slightly bigger than a credit card, I think.
Yeah, the TR4 socket is massive. Admittedly, not as massive as Intel's 3847 socket.
Really?
Yeah, if you look up those, it basically looks like someone took two Threadrippers and welded them together into a single socket.
Yikes.
3847.
Or sorry, 3647.
What is the brand on this?
It's Intel's socket 3647.
LGA 3647, yeah.
Those sockets are massive.
Holy crap, that's huge.
Yeah?
That is a gigantic socket.
And probably not as many cores, or at least similar, maybe, I don't know.
I was going to say the 3647 socket is the socket that was used during that Computex demo with the 5 gigahertz 28 core that required a 1,000 watt phase change cooler to keep it under thermal control.
Yeah, where the spokesperson giving the talk during the
overclocking demo forgot to mention it was overclocked.
Played the dummy card. I don't know. I forgot.
Yes, forgot to mention that the whole demo that they've been giving was in fact an overclocked demo and not stock clocks.
Right, and that the cooler they were using was like meant or designed to cool 1,000 watts or something.
Yeah, it was a phase change cooler, basically typically used as a small room air conditioner.
Just open the side of your computer and let the air flow.
Right?
Anyway, before we get too far afield, because we do need to start wrapping up here. We've almost hit the 2-hour mark, guys.
Yeah, I'm getting all that too.
Yeah, me too.
The computer got to be open, Daddy. You're stuck in it's my computer.
Yeah, it's more like, I've cooked dinner. Why aren't you eating it before it gets cold?
Right.
So, Usman Perzada over at WCCF Tech, he got his hands on an EPIC 7601 processor. Now, for those not aware, the EPIC CPUs are the enterprise version or the enterprise chip that Threadripper is based off of. And the EPIC 7601 is a CPU from from AMD that features 32 cores, 64 threads, but it has a base clock of 2.0 gigahertz. So what Usman did is he took the EPIC 7601 and overclocked it to the base clock of the Threadripper 2990X, which is 3.4 gigahertz. And using that, he was able to run some simulated, high emphasis on simulated, Threadripper 2990X benchmarks. And the numbers he got were pretty interesting. In Cinebench, he achieved a score in a Cinebench R15, the multi-threaded test. He achieved a CB score of, anyone want to guess?
7,200.
A little high.
6,000.
I don't want to guess because I'm reading it right here.
3,867 CB.
3,000.
For comparison, a Core i7 4770K scores 822. After a little further tuning, overclocking it further, he was able to get it up to 5,224 CB.
That's almost double the score, man.
Almost.
And eventually he got his buddy DeBauer involved. For those of you who don't know who DeBauer is a professional overclocker who basically makes his living taking processors and pushing them to the edge of their life. he was able to crank the clocks on this processor all the way up to 5,863 CB.
Wow.
Or Cinebench points. So he got it to almost 6,000 at the 4 gig, and that was at 3.8 gigahertz. If he was able to get it up to the full 4.0 gigahertz that Threadripper 2 2990X is supposed to be able to achieve, I could see it easily topping the 6,000 CB mark.
It's pretty impressive. I'm getting ready to run a Cinebench run here real quick. It's been a while.
Yeah, go ahead and do that. While we're doing that, one of the things we like to wrap up here with the podcast is talking about some hardware deals we found during the week. We already talked about earlier some of the ones we found on Prime Day, which unfortunately have already passed. But if you're still looking for some peripherals, in particular an optical mouse, gaming mouse, there is a good deal on Newegg's flash sale that's available for the next 2 days as we're recording this on July 18th, 2018. The Cooler Master CM310 RGB optical mouse is currently available through Newegg's Newegg Flash site for $19.99. Now that is $10 off the normal price of $29.99. And for that price, you are getting a fairly standard entry-level RGB optical mouse, but it has some nice features. It features a 10,000 DPI sensor along with a ambidextrous design. So if you're a lefty and prefer to play with your left hand, this mouse will accommodate you. It supports both palm and claw grips and can be calibrated with 100-gram weights, or up to 100 grams of weight, so that it's not too light or not too heavy. And so, just the hardware deal I wanted to highlight this week. I was going to highlight that 2700X deal that both Newegg and Amazon featured. Unfortunately, that deal is no longer active since Prime Day is now over.
That's sad.
What was the deal?
It was for an ASRock motherboard with a Ryzen 7 2700X for $380 or so.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I saw that. I don't remember if you posted it or somebody else. That's right.
I think I may have posted it in our group chat for TechForge, but yeah, sadly that deal is no longer active. Otherwise, I would have highlighted it as well. But if you're looking for a solid gaming mouse, no frills, but you want a little bit of bling with RGB, the Cooler Master CM310 is an excellent option.
So, getting back to Cinebench, I just ran 3 runs and got a 1498, 1520, and 1501.
So we'll use the middle one, just call it 1500 even.
Yeah. And I was running at 4.2 gigahertz on each run, all cores.
And that's a 2700X, right?
Correct.
So for comparison, the 2990X, in theory, running at those same clock speeds, would be capable of 4 times that speed, which makes sense. It's running 4 times as many cores.
Right. That's really impressive.
Yeah.
I say 4 times that speed. I meant 4 times the Cinebench score.
Of course, and I'm not running an optimized Cinebench setup either. I'm talking to you guys, and I've had this. I haven't restarted in a while, so.
Right.
You know what I mean?
But even then, it shows that it goes to show that Ryzen scaling is not quite linear, but almost.
Mm-hmm. So that's really impressive, because I know what this thing's capable of.
Yeah, I have a first-gen Ryzen 1800X in my system,
That's
which
right.
is, not quite as fast as your 2700X, but pretty close.
Right.
And I haven't found any workload I can throw at it yet that it can't handle. Short of something just completely artificial.
Or redonkulous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm afraid we have come close to the end of our show. So, Matt, Jason, you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think we've covered things pretty well tonight.
Yeah. Matt, it was nice having you on, man.
This is fun. I hope we get to do it again.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Come back in September for that iPhone 11 release or not release announcement that they're gonna do.
Yeah, at WWDC.
Yeah, it's either gonna be called the X2 or the XS or the 11, and they're supposed to be doing the SE2 or the SEX, whatever they call that one, at the same time. So that'll be fun to talk about too.
/ I can't even say it. This has been my funnest episode yet. Hands down.
Awesome. Well, we certainly hope you've enjoyed watching us talk about tech for the last couple hours or so. Remember, you can find links to the One tab below. One tab is a service I use to collate all the links that we talk about during the show. You can find the link to the One tab page there, which will give you links to all of the stuff we've talked about here tonight. And if you're interested in seeing any of the other content here on CrossForge Gaming, you can, of course, find links down below. And if you'd like to visit our Patreon page or our Discord, where you can find not quite yet copies of this podcast, but audio copies of the main CrossForge Gaming podcast that Assad runs, you can find them there. You can also find links to our Discord, our Facebook, our Twitter, and all other our social media stuff. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining me tonight.
Yep.
I've been Dynamo Ned. This has been the TechForge podcast. And remember, Jesus loves you. And when life gets rough, ladies and gentlemen, forge on.